war, politics, city building, and continuous community reform, learn how one player rose from the unknown to one of the biggest names within the world building community. See how this player was able to start a small community in a single city under the thumb of oppressors, systematically grow in population and land claim, rise through the ranks, overthrow his corrupt enemies, and install a lasting legacy that would see hundreds of loyal players living within his realm across several continents and 2 worlds without ever seeing a single rebellion in his homeland. See how his foreign challengers were stricken down without ever needing to lift a sword, and how rival powers across the world were impacted due to his plots and schemes through diplomacy. Witness and learn from a storyline that would rival a Game of Thrones plot as we uncover how this player became a Minecraft world building legend. In this video, we will take a look into how a certain player has arguably etched their name into the world building list of legends by looking into his humble beginning on the Stoneworks Minecraft server. The player I'll be discussing, none other than the mustache maestro, Xenohun. Much like most of the population on Stoneworks, Xeno found the server through Stoney's videos after being burnt out from other games. When he first joined the world Rathnir, Xeno began to ask global chat about joining a nation. After some time, Xeno eventually found himself in a nation called Viodoxa, but after only a day, Xeno moved on as he didn't want to be in a large and established nation. You see, Xeno had a desire to create and lead. The thought of establishing and leading a nation within a vast world set with rules and structure was too appealing to join a nation which had already been built. But he was not quite ready to begin anew, so Xeno later found a small nation called Wahat. Initially, Xeno joined to be the architect for Wahat, primarily building churches as the nation adapted a religion and culture from the region. Eventually, Wahat's presence had caught the attention of a newly formed nation called Asperium, which was integrating smaller nations within the region. While Wahat prided itself on making decisions as a nation, a few individuals decided to integrate Wahat into Asperium without consolidating the rest of the nation. Again, Xeno now found himself within a larger nation, so he and a few others departed looking for a new opportunity. Though this time, he would not be joining a nation, but rather creating one with his group called Kroban. But after only a short time, Xeno was unhappy, as the democratic nation he just founded was filled with chaos and lack of cohesion as everyone tried to lead through the democratic process. It is here that Xeno almost quit Stoneworks. After leaving Kroban for a short time, Xeno tried once more to form a nation, but this time as its sole ruler. Xeno would make a deal with a nation called Floramia, settling on its borders as its vassal. Upon settling, Xeno named his nation the Order of Muvil. Unknown to Floramia, Xeno already began to lay his long-term foundations. He had already begun planning how he would eventually grow his city-state larger than Floramia and even overthrow the nation and incorporate it into his own. In Xeno's early days as ruler, he knew he needed to secure his nation from the regional power Asperium, so he accepted their religion into his lands and constructed the largest cathedral at the time. Then, over time, Xeno would host world-building events within his nation and build relations with Floramia's leader, Cadexi. Instead of looking outward to land grab and war or dabble in politics and matters that didn't pertain to his nation, Xeno instead focused on his population. His community grew strong and loyal as everyone became close friends, not only in Stoneworks but outside of the server as well. This positive atmosphere gave perfect impressions on those who would join over time, causing them to stay and take part in continuous events within the nation. The singular city would see more activity than entire nations which tried to populate multiple cities. Players could guarantee that they would have interactions with the community members at any given time since they were all located in one place. Eventually, the Order of Muvil would grow its population larger than Floramia and gain its independence. Not long after its independence, Xeno would integrate his old nation Kroban and his friend's nation Draconia. This is where we see Xeno's major tactic that he would use time and time again over the course of 2 years. He would build relations with those who shared similar frustration with particular nations. You see, even though he appeared friendly and open to Floramia, Xeno disliked their leadership all along, just the same as Draconia's feelings towards Floramia. They also both disliked Asperium as well, and so by using this shared frustration, he was able to have an easier integration with Draconia, which gave Xeno a considerable amount of land and a boost in population. In only 2 months, Xeno's lands were filled with cities, and so he made his first attempt to take land from others. Looking north, there was a one-man nation that had double the land Xeno had. Thinking there would be no threat, Zeno moved in, but was met with what felt like an entire world rising to their defense. Here, Zeno learned a valuable lesson which he would use to his advantage later on as another important tactic. Zeno learned friendships and alliances meant more than anything else on Stoneworks. Even if it's only one man, if he had the right alliances, he was practically invincible. So not wanting to start a world war that would threaten his new nation, Zeno backed down and apologized for his actions. This is where Zeno opened his door to politics. One by one, Zeno would make alliances and friendships with minor nations that others would have never given the time of day to speak with. Eventually, Floramia would come to realize the importance of banding together, and so they offered to merge itself with Zeno's Order of Muviel as a diarchy. Playing right into Zeno's hand, he played the part. He still disliked Floramia's leader, and he knew the joint leadership wasn't going to last, but he used similar community-driven events with the new players from Floramia to build his relationships with them. Zeno knew if he could win over Floramia's community, he would eventually be able to overthrow their old leader as a nation's singular ruler. This new nation would be called the Simulami Empire. Around this time, the server opened a new world, Eldhem. While Zeno wasn't interested in the new world, he knew the importance of grabbing land and building even more influence and population. Using loopholes and a no-colonizing rule, Zeno had players form smaller nations under different names, and then eventually brought them all together to form his nation's empire in the new world. Though being in both Rathnir and Eldhem, Zeno knew his lands in Eldhem were at threat due to combined efforts of nations trying to expel colonized nations from Rathnir, and so he built relations with strong military powers such as the Uraki Imperium, who he would use as his shield to remain in peace. The Simulami Empire would go on to be one of the only nations that had considerable amount of land in both worlds, as every other Rathnir nation would fail at holding land in Eldhem. Back on Rathnir, Asperium continued to push threats onto Zeno and his nation by threatening to force integration through their religion. Learning from his success on Eldhem, Zeno would finally take his first attempt on Rathnir to seek an alliance with a nation who is a strong military power at the time, Tortuga. Thanks to his charm and well-played diplomacy and community interaction, Zeno was able to quickly form a friendship with Tortuga. With his nation now supported by a strong military, Zeno formed a new religion which separated his nation from the ever-growing toxic Asperium. Zeno would then make his first appearance in the World Theater by joining the Bardonian Coalition. Here, Zeno would lead a division of Simulami and other smaller nations he previously allied with. Zeno and his allies would join their armies with the Tortugans to hit the Bardonians before the main division could arrive, crushing the defenders on their own. Making a name for Simulami and building his relationship with Tortugans even more, Simulami was now an established and globally recognized nation. With protection on both worlds, Zeno was able to focus solely on world building. This improved his community and international relations. He was able to stockpile money and resources, found new cities, and host more events, all on two worlds. But eventually, through occasional arguments with his co-leader, Zeno knew the diarchy would need to be removed. Zeno would wait until Cadexi, the old Floramian leader, would cast the first stone in one of their heated arguments. Once he did, Zeno took advantage by showing Cadexi as a separatist in the nation. Zeno called his banners and asked Cadexi to step aside so that Simulami would not be torn into a civil war. Though when Cadexi stood his ground and reaffirmed his intent on separating Floramia from Zeno, Zeno had to march. One by one, Zeno would send messages to Cadexi's followers and turn them to his side. Using world building, culture, and community bonds they had built over time as a reason to not separate the nation, they agreed that it would be better to remain united. Since Cadexi would not back down, Zeno had to war his city through in-game plugins. Expecting a large-scale conflict, knowing Cadexi had another nation supporting him, Zeno rallied mercenaries he met through the Bardonian coalition and took a Hannibal-like tactic, moving his army through the mountains and around Cadexi's southern defense. Knowing he was outflanked and outmanned, Cadexi and his supporters fled the city and abandoned their separatist movement. Unknowingly of Cadexi's departure, Zeno's army destroyed a portion of the southern wall only to find one defender who was quickly cut down. Unsatisfied with the lack of war loot, Zeno's allies took to looting the city. Zeno tried stopping them as the city was still technically his, but he had no choice but to watch as soldiers took their loot. Zeno's goal of ruling his nation as its sole leader was finally achieved. He was free to lead, create treaties, hold events, create systems, and play with hundreds of players without interference from other rulers. Over time, his population only grew. More cities were constructed, stockpiles of money and resources were created, and multiple alliances were made. Xeno would uphold every treaty he signed with unwavering loyalty to his allies, which was returned back to him. Thanks to this and his choice through diplomacy, no one ever directly attacked Simulami, though when they were at war, Xeno would always reinforce his allies whenever needed. But one war would create a drastic change in Simulami's military. Although unable to attend the war due to reasons outside of Minecraft, Xeno would send a considerable amount of fighters to defend an ally on Eldom in a war between the Xamot's Union and his ally, Skilbredir. With every aspect in the defender's favor, the aggressor, Xamoth Union, would crush Simulami and its allies. After watching streams and listening to the voice chat, Xeno would realize how weak his military truly was. Realizing that through his sole focus on world building, he led a nation of role players who never had interests or even much skill in PvP. With lack of worry for war, they had never truly practiced PvP or even spent time grinding war materials such as armor, weapons, and potions. Even worse, this defeat also made it clear to others how unprepared Simulami was if it were to be attacked. Xeno needed to act quickly before other nations took advantage of this. Xeno would go on to create a system that would introduce world building into the new PvP focus. Xeno created a system that would use rankings, money, governance, and other initiatives to get his world builders interested in practicing PvP and work on grinding war resources. He used his greatest skill in community-focused events to bring his vast amount of players to improve their fighting skills and accumulate a massive armory in a short amount of time. Though his players were still no match man-on-man with the server's best PvPers, he taught his players to fight as a team. No singular player would find themselves separated from the group, and everyone had a role to play when they formed together. They learned to look out for each other and keep a quiet voice chat with key individuals making the only callouts. In a world where hundreds of players would typically fight through uncontrollable chaos and confusion, Xeno was able to pull together upwards of 100 players to fight as a single, disciplined unit. This discipline would also carry over into matters outside of war, which would help even more through his lower-ranking members in following rules and other requests from governors or regents. It wasn't long until Xeno would find himself in another war, fighting in Plagos. He would come to find that his new tactic would work, as his fighters successfully fought off many skilled PvPers without losing a single fighter. Though their tactic was not about getting kills, it was more about staying alive and fighting off aggressors while allied mercenaries swooped in for the kills. No longer could Simulami be known as being easy targets. The nation was secure again. Xeno would find that he had it all. He created and established a nation which became a world power. He had firm, long-lasting alliances which had incredible loyalty to him, and he had nothing to fear in regards to ever being invaded. But he couldn't help but to want a little more. He looked towards xarahh, where his first town was located when he was in Wahat. Knowing his nation could never achieve land through war, he instead took a diplomatic approach through vassalization and integration. One by one, Xeno would vassalize or integrate minor nations in the region. He would assign his regent or other high-ranking members to work closely with their leaders to build relations and help get them on their feet. He would invest resources and finance into these minor nations, which only helped strengthen their loyalty to him. Eventually, what Xeno had hoped for came true. A minor nation from xarahh called Jertonia asked for Xeno's protection as his new vassal. Jertonia held Xeno's first city from his early days in Wahat. At first, Xeno didn't initially move in to take his old city, which was his end goal on the server. Just as he had done for other vassals, he invested time and resources to help them. It wasn't until Jertonia's leader left the server when Xeno finally claimed his old territory as his again. He had finally come full circle and claimed the very territory he was part of when he was in Wahat. Xeno's end goal was achieved. At its peak, Xeno's Simulami Empire was the largest nation on Stoneworks in landmass and in population thanks to the combined presence on both Rathnir and Eldham. All of this was achieved through zero wars or conflicts. Knowing when to step up or step away from external conflicts, sweet-talking and gaslighting people to gain leverage, becoming allies with enemies of his enemies. Through world building and well-planned diplomacy, Xeno was able to go from an unknown player without a nation to being the sole leader of the largest nation on the most popular world-building server in Minecraft. Do you think you could achieve the same as Xeno? How will you etch your name in the history books as a Minecraft legend?